Welcome everybody. My name is Claire Willsher. I'm a local resident here in West Berks, and I met Miri Lee, founder of West Berks Climate Action Network, at the council meeting where the climate emergency was declared in July 2019. WBCAN is a local action group working hard to drive climate action in West Berks, from lobbying our MP and the local council to developing our own initiatives. This volunteer group is one of many across the country working hard to help their local area to hit climate targets. So we thought we'd take this opportunity today to have a chat about WBCAN and what it's all about. So Miri, can you tell us a little bit more about what drove you to set up WBCAN last year?
Well, thanks for the introduction, Claire. So yeah, I set up WBCAN in February 2019. I was already a member of the Thatcham and Newbury plastic-free recycling and zero waste group, and I was an active member in that. But I saw the need to have something working alongside that. That is a group that is working really hard to drive down the waste in the local area by setting up refill shops and explaining to people how to recycle their waste in the best way. But I saw the need for something alongside that was similarly helping people reduce their carbon footprint. Excuse me. So I saw the IPCC report. This is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So they're a group of scientists, the top climate scientists across the world, who have been meeting regularly since the 90s or so. They released a report in 2018 saying that the world needed to stay below 1.5 degrees of warming in order to keep everyone safe, basically. And in order to stay below 1.5 degrees of warming, we needed to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030 and completely by 2050. And that's the whole 12 years to save the world thing. I saw lots of adverts about that, from Worldwide Wildlife Fund and from folks like Save the Earth and so on. I saw this 12 years left to save the world. I thought, oh, perhaps I ought to find out more about this and understand what it is. And as I read more and more about what was happening in climate change, it wasn't an area I had particularly worried about before. But as I read more and more, I understood more and more about what the risks are. I've got 2 young children, and it's my duty as a parent to protect my little kids. They're only 3 and 5. And as I saw what the risks were to them going forwards into the future, I understood that we needed to have more of a conversation and more action locally on climate change and reducing our carbon footprint. So I set up WBCAN in that sense. I wanted it to be sort of working alongside the already active and already really helpful and constructive community on the plastic-free group, recycling group. And so that was my initial motivation to set up WBCAN. I saw that there already were other climate action networks around the country, but nothing looking directly at climate in West Berks. Of course, there's Friends of the Earth and there's other eco groups, but nothing targeting climate specifically. So I set up WBCAN. I initially wanted it to be as a place where individuals could discuss how to reduce their individual carbon footprint. What's the best sort of insulation for your house? Where's the best places locally to buy electric cars? What's the best places locally to buy low carbon food and things like that. But then as the group developed, I quickly saw that it's actually really hard to reduce your individual carbon footprint in the current world that we live in, right? In West Berks, we're very dependent on cars to get around. We're very dependent for heating our homes on oil-fired boilers or gas-fired, whatever you might have available in your house, and actually the infrastructure around us does not allow us to reduce our carbon footprint by very much.
Mm.
So we then started up a committee with WBCAN, and we started seeing what kind of schemes we could put in place locally to help people reduce their carbon footprint in the most efficient way. Now, the first scheme that we started on was the Solar Streets initiative. This was an initiative that had been started initially in Frome in Somerset, and the idea of this one is to essentially to do a bulk buying scheme on solar panels. So reduce the cost of people putting solar panels on their roof by a group of people buying them in the same area, so that then you can reduce costs by bulk buying and combining the logistics. So we have pushed on Solar Streets primarily last year, and then we were going to continue it this year, but of course the pandemic kind of got in the way, right? So now we're working still at a sort of lower level to see what happens with the pandemic, but still to try and see what kind of schemes we can put in place to help people reduce carbon footprint locally.
Okay, thank you. Interesting. So you're kind of saying that initially you set it up to get people to reduce their individual carbon footprint, and obviously we are still working with that, but you've kind of moved to more community schemes now, and sort of lobbying the councils as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I think, like I said, individual changes are not going to be enough in the current infrastructure that we live in. And I think, for example, lockdown has shown that is the fact. You know, during lockdown, the whole world stopped moving for a period of a few months. But even so, that has had very minimal effect on climate change. So it has reduced the world, or it is predicted to reduce the world's carbon emissions by the necessary percentage for this year. Of course, it has not done it in in the calm and controlled way that the world would have wanted us to. But even so, after the lockdown period, the emissions have sprung back up again. You know, there's a thing called the World Overshoot Day, which is where the world is calculated to have consumed as much of the natural resources as it can for that year, right? And that date was actually Saturday just gone, so the 22nd of August, that the world has consumed the resources that it should in a year, right? And that date has moved. It has moved later in the year by 3 weeks. So in previous years, it has been towards the end of July. So it has moved the date, but only by 3 weeks, right? And we have made massive sacrifices across the world to achieve that. And so this really highlights to me how those individual changes are not sufficient. And so we need to just change the whole infrastructure that we live in order to rely on clean energy, both to power our transportation and to heat our homes, and in some scenarios to cool our homes when it gets too hot in the summer. So yes, we've been pushing on our local MP. We've had 3 meetings now with our new MP as of the end of last year. We had 1 meeting with Richard Benyon last year as well, to discuss how important the issue is to West Berks residents. And we know that it is important just because we have a lot of members in WBCAN, but also when we've been, before lockdown, we were out on the streets talking to people about climate change, and everyone responded very positively that it is an issue that local people do care about. So we've been talking with Laura Farris, the MP, about it is an issue that matters, but also what can we do locally, and what can the government do, and how can the government support us in our local actions, right? Now, of course, it has been a very challenging period throughout the this year, and a lot of things have changed. So in the course of our meetings with her, the government have released the Green Homes Grant voucher scheme, where they're giving £5,000 or £10,000 to lower income households to help reduce individual homes' carbon footprints. And that's one of the things that we want to work with the local council and with the MP on next, as to how we can make the best use of that scheme. And another thing that Laura Farris is particularly keen on is seeing if we can use some of the new government funding to increase the amount of cycling in West Berks as well. So seeing how we can potentially set up mini Hollands in the local area. So that's all quite exciting. And then, yeah, with the local council, again, we've been talking with them, seeing how we can help them to help the local residents to reduce their carbon footprint. So they held a series of climate workshops at the end of last year, and many of our members participated in those workshops to see how we can help local residents reduce their carbon footprints, if there's any kind of schemes like the solar street schemes of bulk buying, or if there's any way that we can help encourage cycling or encourage electric bus take up, things like that. So we're sort of exploring and seeing what we can do, seeing how we can use the current green grants available from the government to make best use of those locally.
Okay, absolutely, brilliant. So, I really hear that sort of like it's working with individuals and across the local, the council. But tell me, have you had any climate deniers join the group?
Yeah, we have. We just had one who actually spurred me on to understanding more about the science of climate change, which was actually really interesting. We had a lot of interesting discussions and questions and answers. And we've, WBCAN is full of very interesting people who were able to participate in the debate. And so my background is actually in physics and engineering. I work in the energy industry, and primarily in the oil field industry. So I work in the field of simulating oil reservoirs, right? And there's a lot of surprising similarities between modeling oil field reservoirs to modeling climate models. And actually, modeling oil field reservoirs is a lot easier in terms of the physics than modeling what's going on in the atmosphere. So whenever climate denial comes up, there's a lot of discussions about the science, and there's a lot of cherry picking of the data and saying, well, this particular period of time doesn't match up with the overall argument, so that makes the whole argument null and void. But what I always come back to, and there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet, you can read all sorts of things, but what I always come back to is that I have studied maths and engineering and simulation of fluids in the earth. I've studied that for years, right? And actually the oil field simulations are used to make big financial decisions about whether you should develop that particular field or not. And so the oil field models have to be reasonably accurate, right? And of course, with a model, it's never 100% accurate. That's never possible. But the oil field models have to be reasonably accurate in order to allow people to be confident about investing millions of dollars into those oil fields. And because it's exactly the same basic physics and maths that the oil field models are based on, it's exactly the same. It's more complicated for the climate, of course, because it's the whole world, not just an oil field. And the physics is slightly more complicated because it's gas, not liquid. but essentially it is the same basic physics, and so therefore I am happy to then believe everything that the intergovernmental panel on climate change are saying, and all of their predictions. Although of course there is a margin of uncertainty. There is in every domain in science, right? We've seen that particularly in coronavirus. There is a margin of error, or a margin of uncertainty, but we know that the overall trends are accurate. And one of the things that actually scares me about climate change is that those models have been shown to be on trend, but they don't take into account all of the feedback loops that exist in the Earth climate system. And so actually those models can be considered to be on the conservative side of things. And then another thing that scares me is that, that we've had mass extinctions in the past. You know, this was a question that came up when my husband and I were talking about Extinction Rebellion, and he was saying, oh, well, yeah, what actually is the chance of extinction? And the thing that scares me about this is that we've had mass extinctions in the past through climate change, and those extinctions have happened over 5 to 10,000 years or so, and the same temperature increases that we're seeing now, but over a period of 5 to 10,000 years. And what we're doing now to the Earth's climate is over a period of 100 to 200 years or so. So it just makes my heart kind of stop in its tracks, thinking, you know, if that extinctions happen because the species just can't adapt to the changing conditions. And if those changing conditions were happening previously over thousands of years, now we're doing it over hundreds of years, you know, what on earth is going to happen? And so that's what really scares me. So basically, I completely believe what the IPCC is saying, but I also think that they're on the conservative side. I think it's highly probable that we are driving extinctions in the world's species. And basically humans rely on those species, right, for our own survival. So I'm sure that human species is unlikely to go extinct. We're very clever, we're very adaptable, but it's not going to look pretty going forwards if we carry on the same track that we are on. So that's kind of the story on the climate denial side, and my personal beliefs, yeah.
Yeah, and I know from my experience that reading the science has really sort of motivated me to get on board and to get involved in all of this, because it's like, wow, there's a lot of things out there predicting what's going to happen. And for me, it was very much about, right, what can I do to make a difference? And I think that's why I stumbled across WB Can, because it's actually helping people to sort of get involved, that we can all make a difference and what we do matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
It's really, sorry, I'll just pick up on your point there. It's really scary because, you know, we're being predicted, the UK Environmental Agency is predicting that we'll run out of water in sort of 30 years time or so. And that's when my kids are going to be my age. And we've already seen it this summer that some of the local counties, not West Berks itself, but some of the local counties have not had enough tap water during the hot periods in the summer. And of course, you know, that is partly to do with leakages and the way that the whole infrastructure is working, and the fact that we're using, you know, clean water, drinking water to flush our toilets and things like that. So, you know, I'm sure in 30 years time we will have been able to adapt, but it is scary, the fact that the Environment Secretary 3 years ago was saying that the UK is 30 to 40 years away from the fundamental eradication of soil fertility. And so I just think, you know, when my kids are my age, there's going to be issues around enough water, there's going to be issues around enough food. I think there was even an article on the BBC News saying that about a third of the world could live in extreme heat by 2070. And of course, the sea level rises means that people are going to be driven out of their homes, and then where are those people going to go? And of course, that's going to cause a lot of stress around the world. in terms of civil wars and crime and poverty and all of that. I just don't want my kids to be growing up in that kind of world. So that's why we need to take action around this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I guess, you know, we know it's scary and what they're predicting is scary. And I thought maybe we could come back to think about, right, what is WB Can doing locally? I know you've touched on some things, but just to recap for our viewers, what are the local sort of activities at the moment that we're doing to lower the carbon footprint?
Yeah, sure. So of course, things were difficult over lockdown for many members of WB Can, many of the committee members as well. So we did take a bit of a pause over lockdown, and we just continued on the Facebook group, just continuing the discussion, but in a kind of low level kind of a way, because there was too much going on. But now that we're coming out of that, we are now looking to see how we can reinvigorate solar streets, because we think that the government grants, you know, the £5,000 and the £10,000, we think that that will cover solar streets as well. So we want to see how we can get that going again. And solar streets, just in case anyone didn't catch it before, you know, this is the community-run discount scheme based on bulk buying and reducing installation costs. But we also want to extend that scheme and see how we can use it for home insulation as well. So see if we can get any local home insulation companies on board with this idea of reducing costs by bulk buying. And so making the best use of the Green Home grants in that way. We've also got some tree planting activities going on. So of course, trees capture carbon and increase biodiversity as well. So there's the lockdown wood that is being run by the Newbury Friends of the Earth. This is where they've got a patch of land granted by the council to plant trees in sort of commemoration of the lockdown period and the tragic nature of the pandemic. And so we're fully supporting them in the Newbury Friends of the Earth in that activity of the lockdown woods. We've got trees on order from the Woodland Trust, but we will also have spare trees left over from the lockdown wood project. And so we'll be working with local landowners, local schools, to see how we can sort of scatter those trees around and just get more trees planted locally. And then, yeah, we're going to be continuing to push our MP to see how we can use what the government is doing to reduce our local footprint. And then we're always sharing local news, local activities, and discussing what's going on the Facebook group of West Berks Climate Action Network. So that's what we're up to.
Brilliant. Thank you, Miri. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. So if anybody's interested, they can find us on Facebook at West Berks Climate Action Network. We're also on Twitter at West Berks CAN, or they can email us westberkscan@gmail.com. I believe now we're going to have a chance for sort of question and answer with Miri herself. So if people have got specific questions to ask Miri, then now's your opportunity. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.